our invited speaker, Professor Dale Whittington, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. A big welcome to the Distinguished Singapore Economic Review and the Albert Winsemius Lecture Series. We had organized several distinguished SER lectures before, and this is the sixth one held post-pandemic. We held it together with the Albert Winsemius Lecture Series. Now, this being a foremost lecture, allow me to say a few words about our Singapore Economic Review Journal. So those of you who are conference attendees from yesterday would have heard some. So I've narrowed down to only a paragraph, just for the benefit of outsiders here and our several ambassadors who are here as well, and various ministry officials. So they may not know about the Singapore Economic Review. So as I mentioned in yesterday's conference opening plenary, the Singapore Economic Review publishes 10 journals issues now per year, and on all aspects of economics, with a special emphasis on economic problems, applied economics, policy economics, and also economics related to Asian economies. The journal has a long history of publication from all kinds of issues impinging on Southeast Asia and the broader Asia-Pacific region. It was initially published as the Malayan Economic Review from 1956, which was later renamed the Singapore Economic Review in 1969. The journal has a wide international circulation, and among all the subscribers, all the Ivy League universities are also subscribers to this journal for a very long time. I'm also grateful for the support of the Albert Winsemius Endowment Fund, which has allowed us to launch this Albert Winsemius lecture series. Back in May 2003, we had Professor Robert Stubbins from Harvard University to deliver his insights on climate change and environmental policy, and as our inaugural speaker, particular to the Albert Winsemius lecture series. We were also delighted to have had Professor Chong Wah Lee, eminent professor at Korea University, to speak on the challenges and opportunities facing Asia at present and in the future in September 2023. Professor Lee was previously Chief Economist and Director General of Economics and Research at the Asian Development Bank, and also an economist with the International Monetary Fund. The third Albert Winsemius lecture was given by Professor Jun Sen Chang in 2024. Professor Chang is a distinguished university professor in the School of Economics at Zhejiang University and formerly the Dean of Economics at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. His insightful talk elucidated on the intricacies of falling fertility rates in China and offered several novel perspectives on this important topic. The fourth Albert Winsemius lecture was also held in 2004 and was by Professor Hogg Hill. He is the name after Heinz Ahn Professor Emeritus of Southeast Asian Economies at the Crawford School, College of Asia and the Pacific at the Australian National University. He shared valuable insights on the significant turbulence and uncertainty faced by the global trading system due to ongoing de-risking, deglobalization, and fragmentation of supply chains. The fifth Albert Winsemius lecture was by Professor Yasuyuki Sawada in 2025. He is a professor from the Faculty of Economics and Director of the Center for Research and Education in Program Evaluation at the University of Tokyo. And previously, Professor Sawada was the Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, in which he discussed a unified framework for resource allocation among the market, the state, and the community. I think many of these previous Albert Winsemius lecturers are attending this conference. I don't know whether some of them might be here this morning, but they were certainly here yesterday. The Albert Winsemius Chair in Economics and Business was established in honor of the late Dr. Albert Winsemius, who served as the economic advisor to the government of Singapore during its early years of rapid economic growth. The chair is hosted by the Nanyang Technological University, NTU, and is awarded to a distinguished scholar in the field of economics of business. Singapore's success owes much to this Dutch economist, Dr. Albert Winsemius, whose economic strategies significantly shaped the nation for 20 years. Celebrating its 56th National Day, Singapore reflected on its pioneer leaders, including founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and Deputy Prime Minister Goh Keng Swee. Dr. Albert Winsemius, arriving in 1960 on the United Nations mission, became an economic advisor from 1961 to 1984. His eclectic and pragmatic strategies blended development theories, promoting export-oriented growth, establishing the Economic Development Board, improving labor relations, and advocating for political stability to foster economic growth. Dr. Winsemius recommended creating a higher value-added economy through education and technical training, leading state enterprises like private firms, and developing the financial industry by leveraging Singapore's strategic time zone. He also advised relocating oil refineries to preserve Sentosa Island for tourism and recreation, reflecting very early sustainable development efforts. His other suggestions had included extending the retirement age, expanding the key industries, and promoting container shipping. Now, post-Winsemius, Singapore has transformed economically, but faces new challenges. His advice on pro-market policies, balanced with state intervention, attracting human capital, maintaining industrial harmony, and focusing on the quality of life, remains relevant today. His vision of Singapore as a center of knowledge, innovation, and economic resilience continues to guide the nation amidst these global uncertainties. For a full biography of Albert Winsemius and his contribution to Singapore's economic development, you may read all about it, because I was an author together with my co-researchers in the book called Albert Winsemius and Singapore, Here It Is Going to Happen. Why is it here it's going to happen? Because he was on a mission in Singapore in the early 1960s, and the team from the United Nations was going around Singapore to try to find a source where would this industrialization take place. And one of the things that he's noted as he went to the Jurong Island area, and then you look out and it's all filled of swamps and swampy areas and hills, and he said, here it is going to happen. And a member of his team was an amateur painter, and he started painting this place. And so that became the picture for the book, Albert Winsemius' book, right? My book. And you can see the book actually outside here at the World Scientific counter. Has a picture of it. And this painting sat in Albert Winsemius' home until he passed away. And the painting was given as a gift to the Economic Development Board. So when I became the Albert Winsemius Chair Professor back in 2019, to my surprise and pleasure, I opened up the mail and I saw the painting, but it's a copy, of course. It's a copy that was given to me by the Economic Development Board. The book was launched actually by Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat in May 2022, and that was an extensive, comprehensive coverage in all the media about the book. Now, the sixth and today's lecture is by Dale Whittington, a professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences and Engineering and City and Regional Planning at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And he was also a visiting scholar at Oxford University. Professor Whittington has been a visiting professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS, the MIT, Vienna University of Economics and Business, the University of Gothenburg, the University of Manchester, and the list goes on. His research focuses on benefit cost analysis, non-market valuation techniques, water and sanitation in low and medium and mid-income countries, and transboundary river basin management. I might add that when I was studying cost-benefit analysis and environment, graduate studies, I came across Dale's work, of course, and that's why I'm really happy to see Dale here in person, after reading his work as a student. In 2021, Professor Whittington served as the president of the Society for Benefit Cost Analysis in the US. Professor Whittington is the editor-in-chief of Oxford University Press Encyclopedia of Water Management and Policy. Since 2014, Professor Whittington and Dr. Duncan Thomas have offered a two-part, massive, open online course, Water Supply and Sanitation Policy in Developing Countries, on the Coursera platform. Over 40,000 students have participated from 184 countries. Today, Professor Dale Whittington will share valuable insights on designing a national benefit cost analysis system. As you know, benefit cost analysis is important for the evaluation of projects and policies. Professor Whittington will describe many issues, 10 to 12 issues, that should be considered in the design and the establishment of a national benefit cost analysis system, and 4 approaches for combining these designs to craft a strategy for establishing a national benefit cost analysis system. The literature suggests that the results of a stand-alone benefit cost analysis are not highly valued or used by decision makers, because the quality of benefit cost analysis may often be poor due to the lack of qualified analysis to conduct benefit cost analysis, and sometimes overly optimistic estimates and so on, misrepresentation. But Professor Whittington will go through these arguments, and he will suggest that with a well-designed national benefit cost analysis system, assisted perhaps by generative AI, may be able to overcome some of these problems associated with the standalone, isolated cost-benefit analysis. I look forward to an insightful discussion with Professor Whittington, and please feel free to ask your question later. We'll have a Q&A after this. And I just want to remark that many of you in the crowd, I think more than 60 in this case, I would understand, are from the public and from the various ministries attending this session today. And Professor Whittington hopefully will enlighten us and enlighten about the use of benefit cost analysis, how relevant it is for public policies, and so on. Now, with great pleasure, please join me now to welcome Professor Dale Whittington for his talk on designing a national benefit cost analysis system. Dale, please. Do you need slide?
You're okay. So it's a privilege to have the opportunity to speak with you this morning, and it's wonderful to be back in Singapore. It's one of my favorite cities in the world, and to see old friends. And I have very fond memories of teaching here at the LKY school. So my topic today, as Houston mentioned, is the design of a national benefit cost system. This is the title of a recent paper of mine in the Annals of Public and Cooperative Economics. There's a huge literature on benefit cost analysis. However, the guidance on how to design a national system is almost completely missing from this literature. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. A government needs to do 2 things to establish a national system. The first is to mandate through executive or legislative action that benefit cost analysis be conducted for a set of designated public investments and regulations. And then it needs to create an institutional structure to support this legal or administrative requirement for the regular ongoing evaluation of benefits and cost of new investments and regulations. There are only a relatively small number of countries with benefit cost systems for the evaluation of public investments or regulations. Under the second Trump administration, the United States has become, until the Trump administration, we had one of the most developed and respected national benefit cost systems. Other countries include Canada, the UK, Chile, Spain, New Zealand, Australia. A few things about this list. It may not be a club you want to join, but I hope you keep an open mind as we go through the lecture. The second is it's somewhat ironic that there aren't more low and middle income countries on this list, because early contributions to the field of benefit cost analysis and development economics often envisioned that the establishment of such systems would be in low and middle income countries, not high income countries. The World Bank long advocated for the use of national benefit cost systems as a rigorous approach for taking account of market distortions in the economies of low and middle income countries. But many of these market distortions have been reduced in low and middle income countries, and at the same time there's been a rise in new regulations related to safety, health, and the environment. So today the application of benefit cost analysis is quite similar in low and middle income countries and high income countries. I'm not going to provide a systematic review of these existing national systems in this lecture. And I know that benefit cost analysis is not a popular topic either among economists or non-economists these days. If you look at the articles published in the top 5 economic journals over the last couple decades, almost none of them are about benefit cost analysis. It's no longer even taught in many universities. But I think if you step back, just as a non-economist, that's a bit strange. I think the public in most countries expects 2 things from the economics profession. I mean, the first is advice on macroeconomic stability, unemployment, inflation. And the second is advice on benefits and costs of regulations and public investments. And for budgetary decisions, that's what the public expects economists do. Now, there are 3 main criticisms of benefit cost analysis that will probably be familiar to most of you. The first is that numerous philosophers have argued that the moral foundations of benefit cost analysis are weak, and there are many problems with utilitarianism. The second is that psychologists and behavioral economists have called attention to the many problems with using preference information to infer economic benefits, including people's cognitive limitations. People's preferences may be uninformed, they may not be realized, post, they may need to be laundered. There's a large literature on the problems of using preference satisfaction. In fact, NUS is actually a center of this line of research in public policy analysis. I'll just put an aside in for Xing Liang has a new book coming out by Oxford University Press that I highly recommend on nudges and behavioral interventions in the water supply sector. And third, there is a large literature on planners and other scholars that's highlighted that actual benefit cost analyses are often very poor quality. So there are numerous reasons for this, as Houston mentioned. There's a lack of qualified analysts. Analysts are overly optimistic about benefits and cost, and they can strategically misrepresent results. All of these criticisms are important. And there are ongoing debates on all of these criticisms, and I'm happy to talk about these in the question and answer, but that's not my focus today in my talk. But I will say 2 things, 2 points about these criticisms. First, I believe that a national system of doing benefit cost analysis is a good forum for discussion about these criticisms. A national system will sharpen a country's thinking about the appropriate decision procedure for setting regulatory standards and evaluating public investments. These debates have been going on for decades and will continue. The criterion that benefit cost analysis uses for enhancing national well-being is not going away. Kishore Mahbubani remarked in his book, Has China Already Won? The arguments that both America and China should make improving the well-being of their people their primary national interest should be incontestable. And I think that's right. I mean, it's not the only criteria. There are moral criteria that matter, but well-being is it's captured by benefit cost analysis to some extent, is going to stay important. So my lecture today is divided into 3 parts. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes describing what I see as the 2 main rationales for establishing a national benefit cost system. And I'm going to spend about 20 minutes talking about 12 decisions that you would have to make if you decide to set up a national system. My objective is really today is really to convince a few people, maybe just one, that they should give some serious thought to establishing a system of national system for doing benefit cost analysis. I'm not going to go into the details of these 12 decisions. I just want to mention them as a sort of a checklist of the kinds of things you would need to do if you want to create an institution to do this. And then third, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes discussing how AI can potentially make a national benefit cost system more effective. So there are 2 rationales. For part 1, there's 2 rationales for establishing a national benefit cost system. The first is efficient capital allocation. This is what most economists think about when they think about establishing a benefit cost system. So I just want to use an analogy that the fundamental task of private sector capital markets is capital allocation. Private investors are striving to allocate surplus capital to investments with the highest financial returns. So the basic approach is to use a discounted cash flow analysis to value a stock. And it's based on what a firm can earn in the future. Benefit cost analysts use this same basic structure, same basic analytical model to evaluate public investments and regulations. But the differences are that the costs and benefits are different, how they're calculated, whose costs and benefits are included, and the choice of parameter values in the model. So millions of investors in the private markets, global capital markets, are participating. They're explicitly or implicitly using some kind of model of discounted future earnings to value stock prices. And the efficient markets hypothesis tells us that the actions of these millions of investors incorporate all the available information about future profits of a company's stock, and the stock prices posted in the market are efficient most of the time. So if the market for establishing stock prices is efficient, then most investors are not able to beat the market. The best they can hope for is to get the market return. My point here is that there's no such market process at work for the allocation of public investments. And without the market discipline, many private investors searching for investments with higher returns, one would expect that the results of benefit cost analyses of proposed public investments would vary widely. In other words, some proposed public investments will have returns that are much higher than others. Now, if a private investor's portfolio is allocated to investments with high returns or even just market returns, these returns will compound over time, and the size of the investor's portfolio will grow exponentially. So an important objective of a national benefit cost system is to establish a similar exponential growth process for public investments. I identify investments with high returns, avoid investments with low returns, and allocate the available capital in the national budget to these investments on an ongoing basis. So this process of investing in projects and establishing regulations with the highest return is repeated year after year. National income and well-being will increase much more rapidly than if public investments include a disproportionate number of projects and regulations with low negative returns. The key point is that while millions of private investors participate in private sector capital markets, make it difficult for a private investor to allocate capital to above average returns. That's not true for public investments. I just want to give you an example. These are some I know you can't probably read the details here, but look at the rightmost column. These are projects that are evaluated, articles that are published in the Journal of Benefit Cost Analysis the last few years. And on the right, you see benefit cost ratios. Many of these projects have returns that are an order of magnitude, benefits that are order of magnitude greater than the cost. So our purpose of a national system is to find these projects. These are truly amazing, and to avoid the white elephants. Larry Summers, when he was chief economist of the World Bank, said you don't have to be that precise with the benefit cost analysis. You just want to find these fantastic projects and avoid the ones that have really bad returns. The second rationale for establishing a national benefit cost system is a little different. It's really to provide the results of benefit cost analyses to the public to promote democratic discourse. And a democratic process or political process can determine whether these investments or regulations should be adopted. From this perspective, the primary objective of benefit cost analysis is really to provide factual input about the benefits and cost of investment to policymakers and let them decide what to do. Perhaps they'll find the information for the analysis useful, perhaps not. But the purpose of the national system is really to focus the use on benefit cost analysis to make sure that you get a good distributional analysis of the winners and losers from public investments and regulations. These distributional consequences are controversial, and institutions are inevitably needed to address the conflicts that arise in big infrastructure projects and regulations. The judicial system is the formal conflict resolution mechanism we use for such disputes. And juries and judges may want to hear evidence on costs and benefits of controversial investments and regulations. I think this is another important function of a national benefit cost system, is to provide the judicial system with high quality analysis. The German philosopher Jürgen Habermas has argued that rational public discourse requires participants have a shared meaning, shared understanding of each other's language. So this is another advantage of a national system, is to bring the economist language and the lawyers and other members of civil society in terms of understanding what benefits and costs mean. And just to preview my argument as we move on, imagine, a court system debating an environmental regulation where the judge, the prosecutor, and the defendant all have AI systems talking to them. They're consulting with AI agents about the benefits and cost of the regulation. We're very close to that world right now. So it's also true that the analytical results from a national system can provide input not just to the court system, but for a variety of less legalistic, more deliberative conflict resolution mechanisms that foster public participation, like participatory budgeting, consensus conferences, planning cells, structured value referendum. These can all be informed by the results of benefit cost analysis. So I'm going, that's the end of my first part. Second part, I want to talk about these 12 design systems. I may not get through them all, but I just want to give you sort of a checklist of the kinds of things that you would need to do if you wanted to establish a national benefit cost system. And as I said, these are not really widely available in the literature. So the first slide, what's the legal foundation of the system? In the United States, in 1981, Ronald Reagan established a national system for the use of benefit cost analysis by executive order. So this was an executive action that charged our Office of Management and Budget with the implementation of a new national system. In contrast, Chile used a legislative approach. They established a system by the national passage of legislation for the ex-ante evaluation of proposed public investments. Executive action has some advantages. It's quick, might be fragile though. It can be overturned with a new executive. Legislation may have broader public support. It may have greater legitimacy. It may have greater resilience. Decision 2, you have to decide is what are you going to evaluate? There are limits to how many benefit cost analysis your system can prepare in a year. So you have to decide what are you going to have the system focus on. There are different ways of limiting the focus of a benefit cost system. In Chile, in the European Union, in the UK, you usually focus on investments. In the United States, we focus on regulations mostly. So that's a big divide. Is this a system for investments or regulations or both? Could be both. You could also limit the focus of the benefit cost system to different size projects. In the United States, we have a size limit of impacts of $200 million. The European Union has a cutoff of 50 million euros. Chile has a much lower cutoff. They use the benefit cost analysis to evaluate many more public investments, about 350,000 US dollars. You could also limit the number of projects. You just say you're going to do 50 a year. So the third design decision is what agency is assigned responsibility for the national benefit cost system. An obvious candidate is the Ministry of Planning or Finance, where the results of the benefit cost analyses can be easily incorporated into budgetary decisions. This has been the strategy followed by the United States and Canada. You could put responsibility in an organization unit reporting to the legislature. This has the advantage that you're very close to the legislative budgetary process. You could also create a new independent agency within the executive branch for doing the benefit cost analysis. This has the advantage that you actually have two executive units that will potentially support the economic efficiency objective. For example, if you have an independent agency in the Ministry of Finance, they could both sort of team up to resist funding a line agency's proposal for an investment with a low rate of return but strong political support. Decision 4, who should conduct the ex-ante benefit cost analyses? The analysts could be employed by public agencies that are actually responsible for preparing the projects. Alternatively, you could have a separate unit that's not involved in preparing the projects, do the benefit cost studies. In the United States, we use a hybrid model where the benefit cost analyses are prepared by a line agency and then they're reviewed at a higher level at the Office of Management and Budget. There's another issue here I'll call your attention to. There's been a tendency to use private sector consultants to do these studies. It's interesting to think why that might be. It turns out in the line agencies that there is a reluctance to take on the responsibility to prepare benefit cost analyses of projects that your agency wants to do. So it's easier to hire a consultant, and then you can disavow the work of the consultant more easily. Actually, the same process has happened at the World Bank. The World Bank used to be very committed to doing benefit cost analysis of its projects and loans, but the bank economists didn't want to do them. So they would hire consultants or push that responsibility back on individual countries. So the basic flow of information in the hybrid system is that the line agencies send benefit cost results back up to the Ministry of Planning and Finance, and they send their decisions and guidance back down. So it's a flow of information from benefit cost analysis to decisions. So an iterative process in the executive branch. So the next question you really need to think about is, when do you want the benefit cost analyses to be conducted? They're often conducted too late in the process. You want economists involved early on in the process of doing benefit cost analysis to find the elements of the project that are not attractive early and modify the project design. So I think economist insights are most valuable early, but you still need to do the benefit cost analysis at the end of the process. So it's an iterative process, and you need to start it early in the project design. Sixth design issue: what guidance should be provided to benefit cost analysts? Make a few points about this. It turns out to be a much bigger job than people anticipated. This guidance, it's not a textbook on how to do cost-benefit analysis. It's instructions that you want the analyst to use to do the analysis. So it's prescriptive. It has specific parameter values that you're supposed to use. And you may decide to use specific software, standardize the presentation of tables. When national systems were first established, the guidance tended to be quite minimal. In the European Union, the first guidance document was 28 pages long. It went through 5 revisions. It's now 358 pages long. The UK's Green Book is hundreds of pages with many supplements on specific topics. So this guidance is not a trivial matter. But the good news is, if you're establishing a system, you don't have to start from scratch. There's lots of guidance documents out there that you can modify, and there's lots of people that can help you. So the seventh design decision: should you do both a financial analysis and a benefit cost analysis? Few points about this. In the World Bank, you had to, for many years, you had to do both. You had to do a financial analysis of a project, and you had to do a benefit cost analysis of the project. In the United States, you do not have to do both in our system. I think that there's 3 main advantages of requiring both. Obviously, it takes more work, but I think it reveals important information about the project. And specifically, it could reveal that the benefits are greater than the cost from a social point of view, but financially the project is not feasible. This is what the European Union uses benefit cost analysis for, to identify projects that are good socially but need public financing. It also has a lot of, from my perspective, pedagogical advantage, because many people don't know the difference between financial analysis and benefit cost analysis, and that's a useful conversation in a public participatory process. Third reason is that actually investment may be partially funded through cash flow that depends on the private demand for the project's goods and services. So financial analysis is really, you have to do it anyway. It's a prerequisite for doing the demand projections required for a benefit cost analysis. So I think it's a good idea to do both if you can. The eighth decision, should an ex post evaluation be conducted? Let me just make clear what I mean by that. So I've been talking about the ex ante benefit cost analysis. So before the project is done, you're trying to decide, is it a good project or is this a bad project, you shouldn't fund it. But if you decide it's a good project, then you proceed after the project is finished. You may want to do an ex post benefit cost analysis to see how the project turned out. And this is important learning information for a national system of benefit cost analysis, but it's basically a different task. It's a research task. Why is it a research task? Because you have to establish a baseline. And that is often not done in the ex ante benefit cost analyses. So you really need a different team of people to do the ex post analysis. This is really a task for researchers. You may want to involve universities in this task. The other thing I'll say about ex post analyses is in most institutions, no one wants to do them. They're not very it's not a very sexy job. You know, it's not a lot of fun to tell somebody, you know, that your project was a bad project, especially if they're your friends and colleagues. But it's an important component. So I think it's something you have to think about in advance. Decision 9. How can the quality of benefit cost analyses. Thank you. Okay. So as I mentioned, Houston mentioned, evidence shows that analysts often systematically underestimate project costs and benefits. In the state of Washington, in the United States, the state has a benefit cost system for its state budgetary decisions, and they've determined that analysts overestimate benefits by about 100%. That's their sort of if the analysis is done by an analyst that is from the agency that is advocating for the project, a good rule of thumb they use is that the benefits are twice as high as they should be. But I think an important advantage of a national system is that these problems can be addressed at a systematic level, not an ad hoc or on a case-by-case basis. One important way to increase the quality of benefit cost analyses is for designers of national systems to de-link the benefit cost analyses from the government's annual budgetary process. I want to make one more point. A national system can also address what economists call the principal agent problem. The principal agent problem in this context is that the executive is trying to get a line agency to do something, and the line agency has other objectives, may not do it, but requiring a benefit cost analysis increases transparency and lets the executive monitor more closely what the line agency is doing. But there are other things you can do to enhance quality. I mean, I think you can have peer review by non-government economists. You can have public review and comment periods. So, number 10, how can public support be secured? This is on our minds these days in the United States. We found that our system for our national benefit cost system really didn't have as much public support as we might have hoped. I want to take a quick detour here. I think to understand the advantages of a national benefit cost system from the perspective of efficient capital allocation, you do need a financially literate public to understand the benefits of this exponential growth process that you're trying to establish. And financial literacy globally is very low. And there's a literature in economics on financial literacy. I'll just give you a quick view. These are three simple questions about finance. They're focused on whether somebody understands compounding, whether someone understands inflation, the difference between real and nominal rates, and whether they understand the benefits of diversification. And so there's the question is sort of, how many people get these questions right? How many people do you know? These are financially literacy results from Germany, Netherlands, United States, Italy, Sweden, Japan. The shaded bar is the percent that got them all right. The white bars they got none right. I'm sorry. So, for example, in the United States, only about a third of the population got those three simple questions right. 10% got none of them right. But the numbers are very similar in Italy, Sweden, Japan, New Zealand, and Russia. Only 3% of the population got them all right. It's very hard to explain the benefits of a national benefit cost system with financial literacy at these levels. So I think it's a long-term project, really. In the United States right now, we're building financial literacy programs in public schools, and it's an increasing focus of public policy. And so that's a long-term vision, but what can you do in the short term for public support? Well, I think it's kind of like managing corruption. I mean, conflicts of interest, transparency, public comment periods. Just to give you an idea, we had a system in the Biden administration where we had a revision of our guidance document for how to do cost-benefit analysis. It was open for public comment, and we had thousands of public comments filed online. So it wasn't just economists. I mean, a lot of people weighed in on sort of our system. 11. So what's the relationship between benefit cost analysis and the national universities? Well, you can use universities in really important ways. I mean, you can train future employees. You can have executive training programs for cost-benefit analysts. Universities can be forums for public discussions. University faculty can provide peer reviews of benefit cost analysis, and they also can provide access to an international network of scholars. So the Society for Benefit Cost Analysis has several hundred benefit cost scholars that would be happy to help you if you wanted to set up a national system, probably for free. You know, they would be delighted to. So there is a community of people that work in this area that could help you establish a national system. I just want to make say something about the last design decision here, and it's how to deal with transboundary consequences. So some public investments and regulations have consequences that extend beyond a nation's borders. A classic example here in Singapore is the Singapore haze, the haze coming from Indonesia. So if you're doing a cost-benefit analysis, say, of air pollution regulations or stopping the Singapore haze, how do you deal with the distribution of costs and benefits across countries? I think it's important to emphasize that policymakers' primary interest will typically be on to understand how public investments and regulation affect the citizens of their country. But there's also strong public support among the global elites for doing benefit cost analysis for everyone. This is a quote from a UK Lord Gus O'Donnell, who served as cabinet secretary and head of the British Civil Service. And he said on the subject of immigration, when I was at the Treasury, I argued for the most open door possible to immigration. I think it's my job to maximize global welfare, not national welfare. It was that kind of attitude that got us President Trump. I mean, there's a populist backlash against that. But I think this argues for conducting two benefit cost analysis. One, global benefit cost analysis, and another for citizens of a country. And I would make one more point here about Decision 12. A national system should provide a formal mechanism to communicate with the foreign ministry about transboundary consequences. The foreign ministry shouldn't be caught off guard at the end of a project that find out that you're either going to help or hurt a neighbor or somebody nearby. So that's also an important function of the national benefit cost system, is coordinating with foreign affairs. Okay, so those are my 12 decisions. That's a checklist of things that you should think about if you want to plan or establish a national benefit cost system. I'm just going to make a simple point about this. Your answers to those 12 questions will constitute a strategy for how you want to establish a national system. And there are different ways of thinking about a strategy. You could think about the main objective of being the system as being this government decision-making, efficient capital allocation, and you want to adopt it rapidly. Well, that's going to lead you to answer the 12 design decisions in a particular way. Or you could think about this as mainly for public discourse, input for policy making. You could go slow, and you'll then answer those 12 design questions differently. So you don't have to, depends on what your objective is, how you answer the questions. Okay, I want to now turn to the question of how AI can help. So there's some obvious things that AI can do to help with the establishment of a system. These would be, if we did a little focus group, these would be the things that would immediately come to mind. You can do a literature review much faster on a particular kind of environmental regulation. You could use it to assess the quality of a benefit cost. You could ask the AI agent, for a quality assessment. You could synthesize and update guidance documents. Okay. You can assist the public and the courts better understand and critique assumptions and calculations used in a benefit cost analysis. But you can also you can ask the AI agent to actually do the calculations. Benefit cost studies tend to be complicated spreadsheets, and OpenAI unveiled an agent to do spreadsheets, so spreadsheet calculations. So you can actually ask the AI agent to calculate the net present values and internal rates of return. But I think the central question that's on everybody's mind about the use of AI for a national system is, can the AI agent produce a cost-benefit analysis on its own, with a little bit of guidance? Produce for me a benefit cost analysis of a regulation on arsenic removal, and what will the AI agent do? So this is the question that we're really thinking about now in the field. So I asked Claude this question. Describe what AI agents are currently available for supporting a national benefit cost system or for preparing regulatory impact analyses. That's preparing benefit cost studies of U.S. government regulations. So Claude's response was, based on current research results, I don't find a dedicated publicly known startup or firm marketed specifically as the AI agent for a national system. But, Claude said, there are several adjacent and converging developments worth knowing about. They talked about general purpose AI assistants and agent plan. There are AI agents for doing corporate financial analyses now, and there are AI agents for compliance and document intelligence on regulations. That's what Claude told me. That's not quite right. This is a very fast-moving field. Their bottom line was that it looks like a genuinely early unconsolidated space rather than one clear market leader. The most plausible platform is the consulting firms, these are consulting firms in the U.S., who would build internal tools on top of frontier models. They say, given how fast this space is moving, I'd treat this as a snapshot rather than a definitive map. Worth a fresh search in a few months. A dedicated entrant could emerge quickly. There is a dedicated firm that's already emerged. Claude didn't pick it up. It's called Vulcan Technologies. It's an AI startup. So young people raise tens of millions of dollars to create this tool, this is what it says on their website. It describes the world's largest legal and policy database and knowledge graph accessible to customers. The agent is called Justinian. For people who work in and adjacent to the American government, has a contract with the state of Virginia, produces recommendations for revised regulations and economic impact analysis. So it does economic impact analysis of regulations for the state of Virginia. And Claude's caveat is this is fast-moving, thinly documented space. The contract was only a few months old as of this reporting. This is less than 2 weeks ago when I asked this query. And Claude says, I don't have visibility into audit outcomes, methodological details, or whether Justin's economic impact analysis meets the standards. That is, how good are they? But I do. I read some of the output from Justinian for the state of Virginia. They're not very good. But they could hire, Vulcan Technologies could hire Houston, and Houston could train this agent. It could be very good very quickly. It could be very good very good. Or why not hire Tim and Houston? Then you start to really build a team to train these agents. I think this is going to happen very fast. I'm actually working now. I have a contract with the state of North Carolina to build an AI agent to analyze benefit cost analyses that are currently produced by analysts and state agencies. And I've put together a world-class team of benefit scholars to train this agent. I'm going to train this benefit cost agent with benefit cost studies from existing national systems. I'm going to put in all the guidance documents, so they're not copyright. I can take all your Green Book material, Tim, and it's all going to go in. I'll take all the EU, stuff, all going to go in. I'll put in the guidance documents from the United States government, OMB. And I'll put in the scholarly literature. Most of this is open access. I will load up every article from the Journal of Benefit Cost Analysis. And I will load up existing benefit cost spreadsheets. And so what can I do with this? Well, what could you do with this if you had a national benefit cost system? Well, I can assess the quality of the regulatory impact analyses that are produced by state agencies or national governments. I can make this available to analysts so they can do better benefit cost studies in the future. And I can make it available to the courts in the legal system to so I'm out of time, but let me just make a couple concluding remarks here. When I was preparing this presentation, I was kind of acutely aware that it might strike you as oddly out of sync with our current political crisis in the United States. In the United States, and not just the United States, in Europe too, there's a strong populist backlash against the meritocracy. And we've talked about it in the conference in different contexts. So experts in benefit cost analysis are really part of the educated elites that many people no longer trust. And the United States is currently in the process of dismantling its national system of benefit cost analysis at the same time that I'm suggesting to you that you might want to establish one. We have dedicated civil servants in the Office of Management and Budget that are leaving. Existing environmental and health regulations are being dismantled without an analysis of benefits and cost. At a recent meeting of the Society for Benefit Cost Analysis, I said to my colleagues that I feared we were entering a dark ages of benefit cost analysis, that members of our society would have to assume the task of keeping the knowledge of these techniques alive, kind of like Irish monks, preserving Christian text in the middle medieval Europe. Perhaps the benefit cost agents that I just described will increase the backlash against this educated elite. I don't know if you're familiar with the term synthetic respondents and silicon sampling. So there are growing, in the United States, there's a growing number of market research and political polling firms that are now using synthetic respondents. These are AI people. So you don't have to ask real people if you want to do a benefit cost analysis and try to estimate benefits of environmental regulations. You can ask AI generated people. So AI can generate thousands of these people, and they can have very specific classifications. They're young or urban, and they're educated, and they're different genders and so forth. And you can ask them, well, what would a person like this say? What would the benefits to them be? I mean, you can ask stated preference questions. And it's not hard to predict public backlash against such uses of AI. But perhaps even more ominous is the use of advanced AI tools by the billionaire class to advance and protect their own economic interests. Paul Krugman has a recent post in his Substack on this, the use of AI in the hands of the oligarchs. But on the other hand, maybe this is too pessimistic. For almost half a century in the United States, we had a bipartisan consensus that cost-benefit analysis was a useful, practical decision-making approach for setting environmental and health regulations. Democrats and Republicans both supported OMB's efforts to manage a system. Supported to manage a national benefit cost system. And, perhaps AI agents can help rebuild this consensus. That's what I hope it will happen, at least at the state level in the United States. I'm working with Democrats and Republicans at the state level in North Carolina to build an AI agent that both groups can use. Will we be successful? Maybe I'll come back in a couple of years and tell you, but I don't know. I mean, it could be that we're going to be in the dark ages in the United States, but that may just be the United States. I mean, maybe in Asia you will take over the leadership of this field of benefit cost analysis and national systems. I certainly think that's a possibility. So we're living in very interesting times, and I welcome your questions and comments.
Cost-benefit analysis back in the 1980s. They actually had cost effectiveness. Cost effectiveness is not cost-benefit analysis. It means that they somehow it has been decided something to be done on, and how best to fulfill it at the lowest cost. That's cost effectiveness. But CBA is a step above that. And the CBA became more and more important from the late 1990s onwards. Why? Because we are dealing with many demands on public money. And so there is, well, they have to decide how to allocate this budget among all these competing ones carefully. Two, we have an increasingly educated public. They want to know, why is this necessary? Why is this good? Or why are you not doing this? They want to know. So a lot of justification is called on. So being more educated, more literate, more questions are asked. And so I think cost-benefit analysis became more and more important. Come to 2010, 2011, in the Ministry of Finance, they set up a Center for Public Management. Some of you may be in the Ministry of Finance here, attending this talk. So I was invited to attend that session because I'm a great fan of CBA. So I've been encouraging this. So 2010, finally, the government started this unit. And this unit's purpose is basically when you have large-scale projects, large funds are needed. You know, they will ask the ministry asking for these funds, the justification for doing some kind of these things. Have we thought about this and so on and so forth? So I think there's a step in the right direction. So we're actually doing more things. In fact, nowadays, almost every large-scale programs and policies and projects, the question will be asked: what are the benefits? What are the costs? Now, as you rightly pointed out, Dale, that number one, cost-benefit analysis is not like a mainstream subject in the universities. That's a problem. And because the universities focuses more on macro, micro, international, and now behavioral economics dominates, right? But cost-benefit analysis is not a mainstream, therefore it's out of the radar. But yet, it is important to offer it because of its strong input into public policies, public management. So those programs that have these public policies, that public policy schools, definitely would have CPA. Now I use the term cost-benefit analysis, whereas they're using benefit cost analysis. They are of course the same. It's just that I'm so used to the British way of looking at the cost-benefit. So it's just cost-benefit, it's focusing on cost first and benefits. Whereas the American is always, if you go to any bookstore, you pick up a textbook, and you see benefit cost analysis, you know it's an American author. If you look at cost-benefit analysis on the cover, it means British author. That's what I found over the years. But they mean the same thing. But as Asians, I think we are quite pragmatic, very pragmatic people. I think people in Thailand may not know, but they actually refer to it as project evaluation. Straightforward, when we talk about cost benefit, benefit cost, it's just a project evaluation. The other second thing I want to make another point is that, as Dale pointed out in his lecture, cost benefit analysis is strictly, actually not financial analysis. It incorporates finance, yes, but strictly not financial appraisal, because the questions asked are much deeper and it casts the net wider. Whereas if you look at pure financial analysis, they are only looking at tangible items which are commercial value, right? So you can do this investment, capital assets, But cost-benefit analysis goes further and talks about the non-market aspects, the intangibles aspects of a project or a policy, the social aspects as well. So that's not covered primarily in financial analysis. And so students often get confused, when they come to a CPA class, when you have a term paper to do, they'll produce term papers that just using, investment analysis. And to them, that's cost-benefit analysis. That's not cost-benefit analysis. So I'll give you an example also, like you build mass rapid transit stations, and you create a lot of dust, vibration, noise, traffic congestion, and the people living there are very unhappy. So have this been taken into account? What's the value of noise and vibration? What's the value of quietude, right? So if you include all these things, then your CPA becomes, your analysis becomes more like cost-benefit analysis because you've included the non-commercial aspects. If you ignore these aspects, you're going to get a very biased way of looking at analyzing projects that seems to benefit only perhaps commercial development. So that's the worry. So I always say cost-benefit analysis is the most useful discipline that students can pick up in the university right from day one. It teaches us that we have a limited budget, limited time, limited effort. How do you allocate this? It's a resource allocation. And for poor countries and developing countries, it's even more important because they are faced with limited budget. And many of these countries also have a lot of environmental resources untouched. And they're going to touch it in order to develop, to catch up with the advanced economy. So this is where I think analysis of using cost-benefit is extremely important. And so I think what Dale has talked about today is certainly true. There's no or very little work going on designing a national benefit cost analysis system, which I think is worth thinking. And if you have got many government officers here, go back to your ministries, try to initiate more of this CPA stuff. Now, Dale has basically talked about three aspects. All right, one is the rationale, which we already talked a lot about. Second is how to do it. So I find the 12 designing the strategies is very useful because they're practical. And the third one, of course, with the advent of AI, how does it impact? What can we use with AI, and so on. And here, categorically, I can tell you, Dale, I would say that AI is not very helpful because there are a lot of things which AI cannot do. When you talk about AI respondents or synthetics, I find it very bizarre. Because after all, when you're trying to obtain issues on valuation and so on, you cannot just ask an AI what would this kind of people expect to give the response. You need to go out to the people. When you do state the preferences and all this, you need that. But AI can help in terms of other things, like when we do hedonic pricing methods, right? So they can get the data, they can help to analyze, all these things they can do. But not when it comes to perhaps state the preferences. The more difficulty there. So I'm going to, to me, the most concerning and difficult part about this designing a mandatory national system for BCA is there are still a lot of methodologies in cost-benefit analysis. They're not settled. There are still controversies behind it. It's not like I pointed out before to you, which is not like the national income accounting system. They have settled it a long time ago, more or less. What are the agreed way of doing certain things and calculating, but not in CPA. So, but if you're dealing with a country as by itself, right? You're not comparing across country, then perhaps there's opportunity here for a country, especially a developing country, to look into setting up this system from scratch. So one is have to settle the methodology, very important. Two is to recognize the differing systems between a developing country and a developed country. So most of the CBA literature comes from developed countries. But in the developing countries, very little. But developing countries' structure, foundation are very different from developed countries. Take, for example, differing financial markets. This will have an impact on the choice of discount rates. Life expectancy is lower in poor countries. So the discount rate, they discount higher. So how do you get around this problem? And then the valuation issue, of course. Then the lack of indigenous data, like value of life calculations, that we don't have. So even in the case of Singapore, which we are quite developed, the valuation of life methodology was only incorporated maybe about 10 years ago, I think, which is a study done by me and a colleague. But at least the government is using these numbers instead of borrowing numbers from overseas. So there are a lot of work that needs to be done. Now I could go on and on because basically I teach the subject in the university. I helped to set up the cost-benefit analysis course in NUS and then later NTU. So I feel very close to it. But while I advocate CBA to be done in a greater scale, and especially not in other countries, very resource-rich countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, all these countries, even more important. But even in those countries, even in Singapore, very developed and so on, we are only starting to do this. So your suggestion about getting help, I think is an important one. But the lack of expertise is another one. And so this is where we have to worry. One is the university courses. Two is the lack of expertise in the country. And all these have implications. Anyway, I want to open up now to the floor for you to ask and make comments. Professor Yoshino.
Thank you very much. Excellent comments. And I have 3 comments. First one is I was working at ADP Institute before I come back to Keio University. We have often implemented cost-benefit analysis. For example, water supply, hospital. Then water supply, the user charges are not so high. So benefits, if we measure just user charges, it is very low. But water supply can bring new houses, new restaurants, and so on. So those spillover effects are included, then benefits will be higher than cost. So I'd like to know the benefits, how much should we include? For example, hospital, then that will improve the health. Then their quality of work will be improved. Then production will be much higher, and so on. So how could we incorporate benefits up to how much? And second one is, as Yusto was pointed out, discount rate. Japan has introduced zero interest rate, negative interest rate. Then what kind of discount rate should we use? We used to use the government bond rate. Even the government bond rate became negative, and plus alpha. Then the future value becomes very large. So I'd like to know what kind of discount rate, because each country has a different yield of government bonds. And last one is maintenance and repairs. What is happening in France? High-speed rail nowadays delays because of lack of maintenance and repairs. So at the beginning, the projects are positive, but in certain point, 5 years, 10 years, huge repairs and maintenance will be needed. Otherwise, the future discount rate, future cost-benefit analysis will become very bad. So I think cost-benefit analysis should be done at the beginning, and also some stages where the repairs and maintenances will be needed. So those are my 3 comments. Thank you very much.
Those are all great questions, but let me just step back.
things that the discovery issue is always there, but the easiest way is not to really look to try to discover what you discovered, because there will be high transaction costs. So I always tell my students, look at past government decisions and infer from there what is the discovery. Two is that you can use the international agencies like you mentioned, ADB, ADBI. You can look at ADB, World Bank, and so on and so forth. So there's certain rationale as to they do some category of the discoveries. Now, second thing is that you can use sensitivity analysis. You use different types, different discoveries for a project, and just work it through. If everything else remains the same as the discoveries, would that change the recommendation for a project? I mean, this is done all the time in international agencies. So, to me, you can get around these kind of issues. Yeah, Professor Renat Deshu.
Thank you. I would like to ask about the public acceptance of introducing such a system. I'm coming from Switzerland, and we do not have a national system established for doing benefit cost analysis. However, for some bigger projects, for instance related to railway construction, things like that, we do them, and then something can be read in the newspapers and in the news. And then it is often, we have a very big discussion saying, well, the assumptions that are made, we do not share them. If you make other assumptions, then you get other results. So the public acceptance is somehow there, but it is a lot disputed. And how to deal with these problems if you have installed such a system? How can the system react in a good way to this opposition, which you can, of course, always have, saying if you just do other or make other assumptions, then you will get different results. I mean, we can do the sensitivity analysis, as you just mentioned, but that's hard to understand maybe for the public. How to deal with that? Thank you.
So, great question. It really gets to my design question about public support. How do you build public support and understanding for these systems? And it's absolutely true across Europe. This issue is, except within the UK and the EU broadly, this is, I think, best conceived as input for public discourse. But if it's done ad hoc, I mean, one project at a time, the way you're describing, I think that's harder to build public support than if you have a system. So if you have a national system, maybe you don't do it for very many projects, but at least there's a locus for discussion of assumptions, methods. There will always be, controversy around this method. I'm not saying these controversies will continue, but the question is, what's the best institutional structure for having this public discourse? And I think having a national system is important. I also think the AI agents are going to change this landscape. Now, I use the example of the courts, but I can use other public participation forums like you would have in Europe, and all the participants will have the agents at their behest, right? They will be able to draw on these. What does that look like in terms of politics? I'm not sure yet. I mean, but I think this is the new world we're entering, where the AI agents, I think, are going to get better and better, and they're going to help the participants in that public discourse challenge the results. You said, well, people use different assumptions. Well, of course they can use different assumptions to get different results, but the AI agents can do that for them much faster. So I don't know where this is all leading, but I would keep an open mind, here. AI agents, benefit cost analysis, and public discourse.
I want to add to that, Renate, which is that the most important thing is whether the study is shared to the public. If you don't share it, then anything can happen, right? But if you share it, at least we can, a literate public can look through the report, can understand a lot of aspects of it. And now the assumptions may be different, as they have pointed out. But one can look certain, why do you choose a certain rate, why do you choose this method? And the rationale is given, reasonable, that is acceptable. Of course, different methodologies can lead to a different, and that's where sensitivity analysis also come in. But it requires, of course, the judgment of basically the policymakers. To me, the benefit cost analyst's job is not to go and make this extra arm, but do the CBA properly, show the different methodologies, do the sensitivity analysis, be transparent, and give it to the policymaker, because the policymaker may have other criteria which is not revealed that may become important. So that's my take on it. I'm sorry, if you permit me, I go back to Professor Yoshino's, because that point about the different timing and so on, that's taken care by CBA. So you have to define right at the outset what is the life of the project. And let's say if the life of the project is X, then you do your CBA according to that. But of course, along the way, things may change like anything. For example, global warming comes in, it may affect all those variables. Yeah, but there's in CBA, there's one of the steps called uncertainty. So if the project has no uncertainty, you have to be very careful. And there are methods dealing with uncertainty which you can apply. And then you can say, again, sensitivity analysis, if you use different approach to uncertainty, you may get different one. But from practical, I think from what I've seen, most of the studies, if it's a bad project, no matter what methodology is bad. But it's a good project, usually whatever methodology, it will lead to a good project. So it's not, it's a kind of theoretical argument, but in practice, that's usually not the case. Regarding the zero interest rate, I have no idea. I don't know what you all did. How did the Japanese decide on their public expenditure projects? I don't know if you are using zero. Zero doesn't make sense. People do discounting all the time. I don't think we should think of zero. So the Japanese case of discount is, I think, is very difficult to follow for CBA. There's another question. I asked him, yeah, please, you.
Thank you for a very beautiful elaboration of the CBA. We call CBA here. So CBA is widely used in public sector investment decisions, and we have been talking about it. But if you notice over the last few years, environmental and social impact of doing business for the private sector is actually getting traction because of the climate change, of the ESG requirements. And as a response to that, there's a different framework coming up, GRI, TCFD, IFRS S1, S2, and trying to capture the environmental and social impacts on doing business of an investment. So I believe there's a lot of scope here to use CBA for private sector investment decisions as well, and that's where it actually directly goes to. And one of the things that's really missing is that private sectors are not into it at all, almost. Only few countries like Australia is doing some work, Canada is doing some work in this area. So can you please let us tell if and how the private sector can actually take up CBA for investment decisions so that we can actually get a better understanding of the doing business and its impact on the social society, environment, and climate. Thank you.
So this will be the last question.
Great question. 2 points. You could require the private firms to do a benefit cost analysis of their projects, right? That we haven't done that in the United States very much, but you could. I mean, that would be. And I think that the AI agents will make this much easier, much more. The private firms may not want to do this, but the AI agents will make it much faster and cheaper for private firms to do that environmental social analysis that they haven't done in the past. And they could you could ask the private firms to submit those studies to the national benefit cost system.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that the government or the public sector must once you do more of this in the government sector, the private sector will have to follow. The second thing is, I think what Dale has just said, which is that you have it specified in the tender that you require some of these aspects. But that also requires the government having the resources to look at all these bids, right? And understanding, have they done a proper CPA, have they gone through the non-market aspects of it? If the resources of the government doesn't have this expertise, then there's no point in specifying all these things, right? So anyway, I think I hope you get some idea. You want to ask a question? Okay, so I'll give last question to the ambassador of the Netherlands. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. A short question because I'm a lawyer, not an economist. But going back in time a little bit, since this is the Albert Winsemius lecture, if a BCA would have been conducted in the 60s, what would have been the impact for the structure of Singapore and the advisors of Professor Winsemius? Would Singapore's economy look different now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, Tim and I were talking about a related question just yesterday. I mean, what you're talking about that happened in Singapore was a system of multiple investments happening at the same time: housing, transportation, environment, and that's a hard problem. Tim's been working on it. Many people in the benefit cost field have been trying to figure out how do you put collections of projects together to analyze. Again, it's a great question. The answer is that simple project by project benefit cost analysis may not capture all those interrelationships between projects. But again, I think a national system is the place to look at these interconnections. I mean, between projects. Otherwise it's ad hoc. You may do it one way for one thing and another way for another. So I think it's a great question. But moving forward, I think you could decide I'm going to do benefit cost analysis not for certain type of urban development projects, but I am going to do it for air quality standards, or I am going to do it for safety regulations. So you can make a decision to limit the scope of the benefit cost analysis to collections of things that you think you can do well. The clear example is military. I mean, no national benefit cost system really thinks that they can do the benefits and cost of military investments. They can do cost effectiveness analysis, but they avoid that. Some people avoid the health sector. I think that's a mistake myself, but some systems avoid the health sector. So, but I think that this question you raise is exactly why you need a national system, to have a careful look. You have dedicated civil servants. You have people that can really think hard about this.
I think it's a very difficult question because CBA, I think, works best with respects to well-defined projects and policies. They zoom in on it. If you take too many, that's a different kind of a study that is needed. Well, of course, you touch on a very important thing, which is actually in theoretical CBA. What's a big challenge to CBA is the theory of the second best. Lancaster and Lipsy talked about this in the old paper. But it has been shown theoretically that if you try to do everything in all the sectors as correctly as possible, but there's some constraint in one sector, you can't do it. Then does that mean that the entire economy, everything, will move towards a higher efficiency level? And actually, they show that it's not. But we are not in that kind of situation, because for that theory of second best to work, there must be all the intricate linkages. But once you show that there's not strong link between one and another, then the mathematical model breaks down. So we are not worried about that. But if we can get our act together and focus on doing proper CBA, complete CBA, not financial analysis, on certain government proposed projects, then I think it already helps us, improves our decision making. Surely it is better than relying on the government, the cabinet to decide. The cabinet must have information, and that's where the CBA comes in. Otherwise, how do they decide? Referendum, surveys, they are not good decision-making tools. And that's why I'm a great advocate for the use of cost-benefit analysis. Last point, recent case, a guy went on holiday. This is a Singapore case. He went on holiday, he came back, and his favorite tree was gone. A tree. And that tree has been shown to be around for 70 years. And he loved the tree. And what was in its place is a bicycle track. Because somebody has decided that bicycle tracks are more important than preserving the tree. Now, if you just use that as a decision, that's totally wrong, right? I mean, nobody has done any systematic study of whether a tree is more valuable, that tree, than a bicycle track. So that's why I've been advocating that we must do more of CPA to figure out and tap into people's preferences better, more systematic way. Okay, with that, I think let's thank Professor Dale Whittington and thank all the